Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you, Wyatt. Your cookies are awesome. Um, um, Being an attorney was a fourth or fifth career for me. I was a union organizer. Then I was a human rights researcher in Israel and Palestine. And then for 12 years, I was Amnesty International's country specialist for Israel and Palestine. I was a documentary filmmaker. I taught documentary filmmaking at Antioch College. And then I decided that rather than making documentaries about people who did stuff, I wanted to do stuff. So I went to law school. I graduated law school at the ripe old age of 50. And I was one of those people who was 1,000% sure why I was going to law school. I mean, I had spent probably, well, by that point, 2 decades doing international human rights work. And I decided that with my resume and my contacts and my experience that I could basically write my meal ticket for any one of the major international human rights organizations. But then, and I try not to stray too much into politics, but then President Obama, bless his heart, started this program called Secure Communities in 287G, which was supposed to target dangerous convicted felons. And it twinned local law enforcement with ICE. And the idea was that, people who were, convicted of like serious crimes, as soon as they finished their sentences, ICE could pick them up and deport them. But what happened in reality, instead of that, most of the people who were ensnared in secure communities were people who were picked up for minor traffic violations. So we were seeing a lot of people who, this is when I was still in law school, my second year of law school. People would go out to buy a quart of milk for their kids and get pulled over by some racist cop, and they would never see their families again. And I decided that I didn't have to go overseas, to dangerous places anymore to fight gross violations of human rights. I could do it in North Carolina. So I switched to immigration law and never looked back. Since the day I graduated law school, all I've done is what we call defense against deportation, defense against removal. Trying to stop people from being deported. And I can go into a lot more detail about how I ended up in Lumpkin. But a lot of people here, know the work of Paz Amigos, and they know that Lumpkin is home to the largest immigration detention center east of the Mississippi. And one of the worst immigration courts in the entire country. The national average for approving asylum cases is 48%. The denial rate at Stewart is 93%. So it's I can't even make a sentence, by far one of the worst immigration courts in the country. And when I first started there, I would say most of my clients were from North Carolina. North Carolina does not have a long-term immigration detention center, so I kind of followed my clients down here. Now I would say a big chunk of my clients are asylee applicants who come straight from the border. And that's just the changing population at Stewart. I can go on. Like my very kind introduction said, I prefer the question and answer format because you folks know what you're interested in. But the best way to describe the immigration courts and how badly broken the immigration laws are is that the immigration courts are like traffic courts with death penalty consequences. The hearings are so quick. The lack of due process is shocking. I used to do a lot of trainings for criminal defense attorneys on immigration law. I would do a lot of lectures, and they didn't believe me. I mean, they wouldn't believe me when I told them what happens in the immigration courts. I mean, for example, the burden of proof is reversed. I mean, you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent. So, I mean, the government can come in and say, well, he's alleged to have committed, 4 armed robberies and 3 DWIs. And, I have to prove that's not true. It's crazy. It's completely topsy-turvy. Hearsay is permitted. There's no real due process at all in the immigration courts. And I really encourage people very highly, if you want to see how badly the immigration system is at this point, come to Stewart Immigration Court. I mean, it's open. It's supposed to be public. And just sit there for a morning, and you'll know more about immigration law than 98% of the people in the United States. It's worth coming down there to. It's worth coming down there to observe. And really, honestly, I'm just going to stop there because, I mean, you know much more about what you want to know than I can guess at. So anything about immigration law, Stewart, Israel, Palestine, whatever, I'm happy to answer.
How much of the animosity, the anti-immigration, anti-immigrant animosity that we see everywhere in the media today, how much of that do you suppose is in the media versus in our American population? And how much of that animosity do you think is generated by President number 45 versus his just reflecting that animosity?
Well, I think it's actually wrong to simplify it and blame the media. By the way, this film just showed at the Berlin Human Rights Film Festival, and I had the honor of being invited by the festival to come speak after the film. And for me, it was particularly cool because I used to be a documentary filmmaker, and so it was kind of like bringing both of my worlds together. And I mean, it's so universal. I mean, we're living in a very, very scary era where racism and xenophobia are, I almost want to go as far as saying universal. I think that a lot of it is fear-mongering by politicians. And here I really do, I'm going to pick my words very carefully, because, I mean, there is a very, very real difference between Trump and Harris. Don't get me wrong. But I practice immigration law under Bush. I practice immigration law under Obama. I practice immigration law under Trump. I practice immigration law under Biden. I hope to practice immigration law under Harris. But in my day-to-day work, absolutely nothing's changed. Nothing at all. There's been no difference at all in my work from the Bush administration to the Obama administration to the Trump administration to the Biden administration. One thing that people often don't like to talk about is that Obama deported more people between 1900 and 1999 than every other president combined. So, I mean, the rhetoric is really different. I had the honor of being thrown out of 6 Trump rallies during the primaries when he ran the first time. It was a great honor. But and it's just very, very scary. So, I mean, trying to blame the media, I really think that's an oversimplification. I think it's very, very deeply, rooted sentiment. And I think the way to fight against it is education. We have to, go out in our communities and talk to our friends and neighbors and say, look, the reality is not at all the way the media is talking about it.
What is the appointment process and term for the immigration judges? And would the legislation that Trump intentionally killed have provided more judges? Do you think it would have helped?
Well, that's a really good question, in fact. I mean, immigration judges, in order to be appointed, believe it or not, don't have to have any immigration law experience whatsoever. I just find that completely shocking. Most of the immigration judges are either former ICE attorneys who prosecuted cases in the immigration court. A lot of them are come from the criminal courts, or criminal prosecutors, or criminal judges. A very, very small percentage come from our side, our former immigration attorneys. But I mean, the process is just really super simple. You don't have to have any immigration law experience whatsoever. And I see that in a lot of the new judges. A lot of them are former JAG. A lot of the immigration judges are former JAG. There is a desperate need for more immigration judges. And I know this may not sound like a whole lot of time, but I have clients now who are having their individual hearings in the immigration court in February and in March. Okay, and these are people who have already either had their bonds denied or are not eligible for bond. So they're stuck in that, well, I don't want to get into profanity, but hellhole. Can I say hellhole in a church? In that hellhole until February or March to get their hearings heard. And, you know, a lot of my clients, you know, are saying, I don't want to bother. You know, I'm very scared of going back to Guatemala. I'm very scared, you know, of going back to Yemen. But I just can't stay here, you know, that long. I can't stand another minute here. I often say that ICE uses incarceration as a litigation strategy. Right? They use incarceration as a litigation strategy because they know people just will do anything to get out. They just don't want to stay there that long, even though their fear of getting sent back is real. Yes, ma'am. I think she needs a microphone.
How are the immigrants at the detention center in Lumpkin treated? Is there abuse? How long are they detained there?
As I was just saying, I mean, at the moment, you know, quite a long time. I mean, I think the longest one of my clients was held before I could get him out was 3 years. But a lot of that time was before I got the case. It's the one thing to keep in mind. Everybody knows that the Stewart Detention Center is a private, for-profit prison, which are words that should never be in the same sentence, in my opinion. There's, you know, a whole lot of problems. I mean, is there a lot of physical abuse? I honestly really haven't seen that in terms of the guards physically abusing people, but the conditions themselves, you know, are abuse. People are held in solitary confinement. When they build these private prisons in the middle of nowhere, one of the things they promise is jobs to the community. But the reality is that most of the work of actually running the detention centers, the maintenance, the cooking, the laundry, all that stuff, is done by the prisoners themselves. The guards get very pissed off when I call them prisoners. They don't like that at all. And they get paid between $1 and $4 a day. right? Not $1 to $4 an hour, $1 to $4 a day. And for the prison, it's like the perfect storm, because the biggest complaint that my clients have is that they who said it? I can't remember. The food really stinks and there isn't enough of it. And that's a real problem. So in order to earn money, right, to buy food from the commissary, they have to work at these jobs where they get paid $1 to $4 a day in order to be able to buy food at these commissaries that sell the food at an incredibly inflated rate. But I mean, the biggest abuse, in my opinion, is the fact that these are not criminal detainees. You know, breaking the immigration law is a civil offense. Most of, I would say, I don't want to put a percentage, the overwhelming majority of my clients should never have been detained for a single day. You know, the national average for people who are in the asylum process for attending all of their court hearings once they're released, right, is 98.3%. 98.3. So, I mean, none of these people have an incentive to flee. I mean, why would you risk your life, right, to come to the United States, to seek asylum, and then, you know, just not show up at your hearings? Right? There's no logic there, right? You want to get asylum. You want due process. You want justice. So, I mean, to keep people detained for months and months and months and years in some case, you know, it's totally ridiculous. But these private prisons donate millions and millions of dollars to both political parties to maintain their profit centers. They shouldn't exist at all. Most of these people should never be detained. And lately, and I know people may or may not believe me, but it's so completely, totally random, right? So I have a whole bunch of clients where a husband and wife will cross the border together, and this is from all over, from the former Soviet Union, from Guatemala, Yemen. I've had a lot of countries where they cross the border together, right? And they'll release the husband and detain the wife, or they'll release the wife and they'll detain the husband. And I swear I'm not making this up, but I have 2 cases now where I've had twins, right? Twins. One was a pair of brothers and one was a pair of sisters. Exactly the same set of facts, exactly the same asylum claim. And at the border, they released one of the twins and they detained the other one. How is there any logic or justice there? It's crazy.
I've had some experience in American courtrooms, and they're, of course, evidence-based. So it's kind of a mystery to me how it is that an immigration judge can decide whether somebody is telling the truth about being persecuted or whatever, and unless there are others who came with him and he's part of a group and they can testify for each other. But it seems to me there must be a lot of people that really have no evidence except for just what they're saying. So how on earth do immigration judges make decisions like that other than by just a gut reaction?
Don't get me started. Don't get me started on that. But I mean, there are some judges that I think will only believe that you have a risk of being killed if you're already dead. And I'm really not exaggerating there. I mean, it's so totally arbitrary and capricious, you know, in a lot of different ways. I mean, you're not going to get a letter from your oppressor, you know, saying, you know, yes, I persecuted him. And it's even worse than that, because the categories under which you can be granted asylum are so narrow. So at the moment, in the immigration courts, under law and under precedent, victims of gang violence, right, in most cases are not eligible for asylum. So even if I can prove, pretty much 100% that my client risks being killed if they're sent back to Guatemala because the gangs control their neighborhoods, that's not a basis for asylum in most cases. And it's very, very frustrating because you can have exactly the same set of facts in front of two different judges, and one judge will grant and another judge won't. Like I said, a few minutes ago, I mean, the national average for approving asylum cases in the immigration, I think it's between 45 and 48%, and at Stewart, the denial rate is 93%. How can that possibly exist?
I want to thank you for coming. Your words are very compelling. I just think that this must break your heart to see all this going on around you, and I wonder how that affects you. Can you keep doing this, and why don't you become a judge?
Well, that's an interesting story. I actually, I don't know if I'm talking out of school or not, but I actually applied to be a judge. I did. And I got all the way to the very last step where I actually, had an offer, right? I actually had an offer. And then somehow in the vetting process, they found something in my background that they didn't like. And I'm not exactly sure what it was. My guess probably is it was my work on Israel-Palestine, but I can't prove that. However, I will say that if I had gotten the job, I honestly think I would have been totally miserable, because the laws are so bad and your discretion is just so narrow because the laws are so bad. And I don't think I would actually be able to deport a single person. And because of the way the laws work, I wouldn't have had any option. So, I did apply, and I'm glad I went through the process, and I was disappointed when I got denied. But in the end, it's the best thing that happened to me. To answer the other part of your question, and if you see the film, I talk a lot about this, but people know the parable of the starfish, right? And I always start to cry when I tell the story. But the parable is that there's a little girl, and she's walking along the beach at low tide, and she's picking up starfish one by one and throwing them back into the ocean. And this old man comes up behind her and says, little girl, what are you doing? You can't possibly make a difference. And she said, well, it made a difference to that one. And that's what keeps me going. I almost wore my starfish shirt today. I have a bunch of T-shirts and shirts that have starfish on them, but I decided the vote T-shirt was more important today. But, that's it, right? So I can't win every case. But to the people who I can save, the people I can rescue, it makes all the difference. I often say that I have the coolest job on the planet because I get to save people's lives and put families back together and get paid.
We got time for one more short one.
All right. I guess with the word detention center before coming, or the average American, I would say, okay, well, they did something criminally wrong. Now, of the people that are held there currently, what percentage would you say actually had done a criminal activity defined by our legal system here versus people that are seeking asylum in the point that if they do go back, they'll either be killed or murdered or this or that?
That's actually a really good question. I appreciate it. There are people who are detained at Stewart, okay, who got into deportation proceedings after committing crimes. The bulk of my clients who are there for committing crimes are there for drunk driving, driving while intoxicated. And I'm not saying that drunk driving is not serious. I mean, drunk driving is a very deadly, serious crime. But should someone be, deported on that basis? That's a very difficult question. I actually, my email address is marty@dcatlaw.com, which stands for Deferral of Removal under the Convention Against Torture. So a lot of my clients, they committed relatively serious crimes, but should they be sent back to, Venezuela or Nicaragua or El Salvador, where they risk being killed? That's a very, very difficult question. But I would say the overwhelming majority, and if I had to put a percentage on it, I would probably say 95% or higher of the detainees at Stewart, the only thing that they're guilty of is trying to build a better life for themselves and their families.
Thank you, Marty.